All right, in this part of class, we're going to continue with our discussion of relational control. We're going to look at compliance gaining strategies, and we're going to look at how relationships fall apart and how we get into some really destructive communication patterns. First thing we want to do is look at compliance gaining strategies. And these are classified into three kind of groups. You'll see yourself or others doing this to you. They're grouped according to the kind of power that we use in relation to the other person. The first domain of power is probably, well, I don't know, the one's stronger than the other, they're just different. In the first, you have the power to manipulate the expectations and consequences of the other person. You can take away their sagogenesis. You can cut their merit pay. You can fire them. You know, you have some real power. You can ground your teenager for the week or the month or the year. There's some kids, I understand, they're grounded for so long they don't know if they'll ever be back. Okay, but when we have this kind of power, we may do things like promises, threats, warnings. The bosses, parents, people that have power, that have that kind of control may do that. You know, if you do that again, this is going to happen to you. I promise you it's going to happen. Sometimes you're threatening, sometimes you're just making a promise that that's how it will be. But warnings, threats, and promises come out of those kinds of relationships, represent that kind of control. Okay, the second type of control is less autocratic. It comes out of an identification, out of a powerful relational position. Some of the techniques there may include liking, flattery, emotional appeals, positive, negative esteem. Dr. Williamson and I have an identification with each other. We have a liking for one another. We have a good relational basis. And so I said to her, it would please me a great deal if you would come to my crisis class and lecture on relational power and control. To which she responded, sure. And then after she got here and looked at the camera, she went, but she's done fine and we're pleased. You know, and I said, it will make you feel so good. You can show it to your boss. He'll be so pleased, you know. But there are things that we do because we identify with one another, because we want people to like us. And you may see young children playing this kind of game. If I can borrow your toy, I'll be your friend. Well, we're working on a relationship here, and we're using a power. Now, if I don't care whether you're my friend, I can say, forget it. You know, but if I want to be your friend, then I'm going to try to do those things that will please you, and that will be reciprocal if you want to be my friend. The third area involves the ability to define values and obligations. And this is particularly applies to people who are really significant in our lives. If you are a strongly religious person, you listen to what your minister says. You know, your minister, your parents, perhaps your grandparents, maybe it's a friend next door, may or may not be your spouse, but whoever the people are that are really the significant people in your life who help define your values and obligations, then they can use things like debt. You owe me. I owe Robin now, okay? She'll get even, I have no doubt. Okay, guilt. If you do that, you're going to be sorry. You know, that's going to make you feel, you should be ashamed of yourself. I cannot believe that you would do a thing like that. Now, some people, we don't care. You know, you can't believe I do that? Well, surprise. You just found out something, didn't you? You know, but if this is a person that I really like and I care what they think, then I don't want to do anything to hurt them. And most of us feel that way toward grandparents. Hopefully you feel that way toward your parents. You know, you don't want to embarrass them. You don't want to shame them in any way. And so those kinds of things may use moral appeals. This is what a good person would do. A person with heart A kind person would do this. Only the rotten scum of the earth would pull a stunt like that. Okay? But all of these are strategies that we use, whether you're trying to get the car out of your parents for the weekend, and there are other techniques that are used when you're in, and I don't have them all listed here. If you're in a low power position, then you may whine, "Oh, please! Oh, but you're the best mom in the whole world." Well, that's not what you thought when you had an attitude 2 hours ago. Begging. Everybody else is doing it. Appeals to peer pressure and norms and bandwagon approaches. There's just lots of things we do, from begging, pleading, whining, promising, warning, threatening. That's a new word. But all of this has to do with the power relationship that we have with the other person, and whether we're the person. And these three categories particularly reflect when you have some kind of power, how you use that in relation to the other person. This comes out, I don't know if you can read the footnote on this one. This comes from the work of Wheelis, which was published in 1983 in the Communication Yearbook, which is an annual publication put out by SAGE and has lots of good communication articles in it each year. Okay, let's look. We looked at Knapp and how relationships come together. Now we're going to look at how the stages, according to Stephen Duck, on how relationships fall apart. Okay, you've gone through all these stages. Perhaps you've even bonded with this person. Maybe you've been married for 20 or 30 years. And somewhere along the way, or maybe this is just your roommate and you decide you're tired of being around them. It can be a relatively simple relationship. It can be a very long-term relationship. But the first thing that happens is this intra-psychic phase, meaning that it's happening inside your own head. That's what intra-psychic means. But in your head, you start going, gee, why did I marry this person? Or why did I take the engagement ring? Or why did I ever think we could be roommates? But inside your head, you start to question. And you start to look at the relationship and say, I don't know, I might rather live alone. She turned out to be a real pig of a roommate. And I'm so neat and tidy, you see. Maybe this was a mistake. There's something wrong with this picture. And it can be all kinds of things and instances that cause you to feel that way. But at phase one, it's in your own head. And you may go along, it could be days, it could be weeks, it might even be years. Especially if this has been a long-term relationship. And then you're saying, how could things have been okay for 15 years and now they're not okay? And so you're going through that mentally reflective process, trying to sort out what's going on. You may be trying to fix it, but that questioning takes place. Okay, dyad, as you know, means two. So the dyadic phase comes next. You may sit down with the significant other, spouse, roommate, whatever. Maybe you've been living with a parent for many years, but you may sit down with that person and talk about it and say, things don't seem now like they were a few years ago or 15 years ago. We're losing the magic in the relationship. The kids have come between us, or whatever it is you think may be going wrong. Our habits seem to have changed, but you may discuss it with that person, or you may go to someone else and say, Robin, do you have these kinds of problems in your marriage, or do you have this kind of problem with your mother, or maybe you go to someone else who has a roommate, and you say, do you and your roommate fight over things like A, B, and C? Well, yeah. Oh, okay. And then you may be relieved to find out this is a normal phenomenon, and you just need to kind of roll with it, and that's okay. And you might get stuck at that phase. You might even work it out and resolve it. But if you don't, if you discover, no, this is kind of unique to the two of you, or it happened to Melanie and her roommate and they stopped being roommates, or it happened to Nancy and her husband and they got a divorce, well, maybe I better talk this over with, I don't think Nancy's had a divorce, just for the record, but anyway, I don't even know. But anyway, then it may move, if it continues, it will move to a next level that's more social. And I may start talking to my friends saying, well, I've got some real problems in this relationship. You know, things are just not working out the way that I thought they were, but I'm getting input from other people. And normally we're trying to fix it, or at least we'll start out trying to fix it. And if we can't fix it, then we may move to a kind of problem solution phase of, well, what am I going to do about it? You know, I've got to decide what I'm going to do. I'm really unhappy in this relationship. Should we get a divorce? Should we get separate apartments? What is it we want to do about that? But at the social level, it's moved beyond the two people. It's expanded to at least some, if not all, of their friends, and there's an interaction taking place there. Then, if the relationship does in fact totally fall apart, the couple gets divorced, the roommates move and go their separate ways and so forth, then you have to have a story to tell. The relationship, as grave dressing, the relationship is dead and buried, but it needs a marker. You may want some flowers on it. What are you going to tell people? You know, particularly those peripheral people in your social circle that come back to you maybe a year later when it's time to do Christmas cards and you only have one name to put on there instead of two. Are you going to enclose a letter and explain what happened? Or are you just going to let them wonder? You know, is this person deceased? Did they move away? What happened? When, you know, and if it's something serious like a divorce and you go back to work or church or wherever your social groups are, what are you going to tell those people, the people who've not been in this inner social circle that have watched this progress, who know what's going on? What do you say to people? You know, do you badmouth your ex and, well, that blankety blank, 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 blank did this and so, you know, he was the scum of the earth and I was lucky to get rid of him? Or do you just say, well, we just kind of grew apart over the years and decided to go our separate ways? You have to have some kind of a story that you're going to tell, and that story can be a kind, and I don't mean story fictional, I mean story explanation of what took place here. And it needs to, you have to decide, and it's helpful if the two people tell the same story. But I mean, there's no guarantee. You know, one may be bad-mouthing the other, and the other is saying, well, we just, you know, had our differences, and that was that. But there has to be some sort of explanation that you give to people who, when they first encounter that. But once the divorce is complete, the relationship is dissolved, whatever it may be, then that socially acceptable story needs to be arranged for, taken care of, and be available. Okay, so what are some strategies then if we see that the relationship is falling apart, whether you're the party, whether you're observing someone else, or if you're the person doing the dissolving, or if somebody is trying to dissolve the relationship that you're in. You know, maybe you think the relationship is not as strong as it used to be, and so you're getting suspect that something funny's going on here. You know, he's not calling as often as he used to. She's not free to go out as often as she used to be, and so forth. Well, here are some of the things that we do in order to disengage from one another. And the first is withdrawal. And if you're just dating, that's certainly easy enough. You get busy. Well, I just can't go out this weekend. You know, I've got to study. Hans test is a killer. I'm going to be studying for a really long, I may be studying all semester for this class, you know, but call me in June. You know, sometime. All right, watch that man run out of my hair. Or if it's a married couple, they may, as Robin was suggesting earlier, they may be going off to separate rooms. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with separate workspace. Some people just need a quiet place to concentrate. But if you start taking your book and going to the other end of the house specifically to get away from the other person, you know, then you are intentionally withdrawing. And when there's that intentional withdrawal, then that's a relationship disengagement strategy. Okay, pseudo de-escalation. You know that this relationship is on the rocks, but you say to the other, why don't we just go back to being friends? You know, I think this relationship intensified too fast, and so let's just kind of back up a little bit and be friends. And you know that just as fast as you can, you're headed into the sunset. Okay, well, we call that pseudo de-escalation. Now, a lot of people like number 3. Number 3 is cost escalation. It gets increasingly expensive to be your friend or your date. Walking barefoot through the grass, eating an ice cream cone is no longer good enough. Needs to be a steak dinner at $30 a plate. Or you better show up with flowers and candy and jewelry and all sorts of things. Now, it's not always monetary. Sometimes it's emotional escalation. You decide just to be a real bitch or SOB so that they'll get annoyed and go away. So you gripe, you nag, you pick fights. We'll come to fights in a minute too. But you run the cost up. You ever get tired of just being around some people? You know, they groan and moan all the time. It costs a lot to put up with that. You got to like a person a lot to put up with some things that some people do. But if you intentionally run the cost up, if I'm going to pick on you every time you come around me, I'm going to nag you, I'm going to pick at you, I'm going to chop on your self-esteem, well, that's getting pretty expensive emotionally. And so maybe it's simpler just to stay away. Okay, fading away is where both people sometimes realize that the relationship just isn't all that you'd hoped it would be. We went through the stages earlier of coming together and of initiating the relationship and intensifying the relationship. Well, maybe in that intensification phase you discover, ugh, this is not who I thought they were. The lights go down and the personality changes, or the lights come up and the personality changes. For whatever reason, there's a mutual agreement that this was not such a good deal. And so mutually you both withdraw and you fade away from that relationship. Okay, state of the relationship talk. That's when you realize something is wrong and you call the person in and you say, Robin, we're going to have to talk about this. I'm tired of wadded up wash rags on the bathtub. I'm tired of dirty clothes all over the floor. I stapled your socks to the floor and you never noticed.
That's a good one.
I know somebody would. Actually, she tacked them rather than stapled them. And her husband's socks stayed there for, 2 or 3 weeks. And he never noticed, so she eventually pulled the tacks out and, put them in the washing machine. He's a CEO now, and they're still happily married, but he still doesn't pick up his laundry. But the state of the relationship talk says, we got some problems here. We need to talk about this. And we may talk about it, and we may be able to fix it. But we may also talk about it and agree that this is just pretty dysfunctional, and maybe it's time we terminated this little roommate arrangement we have, or whatever it might be. Okay, attributional conflict. We won't ask for a show of hands, but did you ever pick a fight and then blame the other person? Well, that's an attributional conflict. You work it around and you manipulate it until there's a fight, but it's the other person's fault. If you had made me do such, we'll talk about some language that's used, I statements and you statements and things in just a minute. But there are things we do that pick fights, and then we blame the other person and project stuff onto them. And then negotiated farewell. There's sometimes, maybe following that state of the relationship talk, that you discover that this relationship just really isn't going to work out. So how are we going to end it? You know, are we going to throw each other's stuff out into the street for the garbage collectors to pick up? Are we going to get a divorce? If so, you know, who takes the car, who takes the house, who takes the kids, who takes the dogs, who takes this stuff, that stuff, so forth. And there are just all kinds of things, whether it's roommates separating, who have to work out the utilities and the rent, and who keeps this place and who moves to another, or if it's a divorce after 30 years and you've got a whole house full of stuff to sort out. There are times that you just have to sit down and talk it over and work it out and say, you know, everybody will be better off in this situation if the relationship is totally dissolved, or is, at least if there's a divorce. Sometimes there are negotiated farewells that are peaceful enough that communication lines stay open afterwards, even though the formal relationship has dissolved. Do you have any question about these? Okay, well, we're going to shift then and let Dr. Williamson talk about some more behaviors that take place in dysfunctional relationships.
First, I'm going to talk about some more global behaviors that can be problematic, and then we're going to talk about some specific interactional strategies that cause difficulties. So first to the broad ones. One of my favorite relational intricacy, and that's what William Wilmot calls these, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, a self-fulfilling prophecy is when false perceptions become reality. W.I. Thomas once said that if people define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. Each of us defines our world in a particular way. We can define other people as friends who care about us, or we can define them as out to get us. And of course, if you're defining people as friends, what are you going to do? You're going to be warm. Your nonverbal communication is going to be much more pleasing. You're going to maintain eye contact. You're going to lean toward them. And of course, because you're acting toward them in a friendly way, they're going to be friendly. If you act toward them like they're hostile, you lean back and you won't meet their eyes and all of that, then they're going to think you're unfriendly. So unfortunately, many times we can create these self-fulfilling prophecies, or others that can create them for us. Now, they can be both good and bad, and I've got some examples of bad ones and good ones. Some of the classic bad ones, of course, have happened in education, you know, where the teacher has said that Johnny is a bad boy, and Johnny is told he is a bad boy again and again and again, and so he begins to behave in that way, when in actuality Johnny really wasn't a bad boy at all, but he had a hearing deficit. So he could not pay attention to the teacher because he couldn't hear her. There's some classic awful stories that you hear about in education. There's some really interesting studies that have been done. There was a study by Rosenthal, and he took two different groups of matched students who were very alike in their abilities and their likes and dislikes and all of that. And he put them with two teachers who were also equally matched in terms of their abilities, with the same lectures and some of the same stimuli, but one teacher was told that she had the gifted group. You know, these were the kids with the 130 pluses IQ-wise. They were bright, they were energetic, they were creative. This group could do anything. They could learn anything. The other teacher was told, and interestingly enough, both groups of students had about 110 to 115 IQ range. They were certainly, above average. They were good learners. They achieved on grade level or a little bit above. The other teacher was told that the group was exactly what they were. That they were, good learners, that she could expect them to perform on grade level. Interesting, after 6 weeks of this, the group that was termed the gifted group tested 2 to 3 grade levels above where they were supposed to, whereas the grade level people tested exactly where they were expected to be. A really interesting study and ghastly example of what we can do to our students by putting them in categories or putting them in pockets. One of my favorite self-fulfilling prophecy stories is the old Don Quixote story, and one of my favorite musicals. And Don Quixote, sees this. I guess she's a prostitute, and she lives a simply ghastly life. And she lives in this kitchen, and she's all dirty, and she has, no nice charm. She has had no education. She's had a simply dreadful life. And he comes and kneels before her and calls her my lady Dulcinea, and for a long time she denies this. She says, I am Aldonza, I am the kitchen maid, I have nothing, I am no one. But he continues and says, you are Dulcinea, you are my lady. And then, of course, by the end of the book, or the play, as the case may be, she finally comes to believe that she is Dulcinea, that she can be a lady, that she can turn her life around. And, of course, it's a wonderful story. And there's all kinds of stories throughout literature where this self-fulfilling prophecy has been positive, but it also can be extremely negative in a relationship.
Sometimes called the Pygmalion effect,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes, it's
because of that story.
Yes, the whole My Fair Lady. I can turn this. What did he call her? Gutter snipe, or whatever he called her. I've kind of forgotten the dialogue. Into a princess, and nobody will know the difference. And of course, he does. And she does.
Now, part of that had to do also with changing her language patterns.
Oh, yes.
But he had to make her believe that she could do that.
That she could be a princess. And so the whole idea is that we can believe things to be true that aren't. And it does have a certain sequence. What happens is Joe makes an inference about Mary. Okay, maybe he thinks Mary doesn't like me. So Joe acts toward Mary in terms of this inference. And so he acts a little hostile, a little hesitant. He doesn't speak to her, in the same way that he speaks to other people. And so Joe acts toward Mary in terms of this inference. And then Mary makes inferences about Joe, or person A, in terms of this action. She thinks, oh, gee, Joe must not like me very much. And so she reacts toward Joe in terms of this inference. And so she acts kind of hostile and hesitant and keeps her distance from him. And so Joe's inferences tend to be confirmed by B's or Mary's actions. And of course, we can turn this around in the other way. It can be positive. They can act positively toward each other. But the problem is that people are picking up nonverbal cues, assigning perceptions to those nonverbal cues, and then acting accordingly. So it can be a really serious situation.
Maybe you should read through those steps one more time.
Okay.
We've gone fast for the home folks.
Joe makes an inference about Mary. He looks at her, and he thinks she's hostile. Well, maybe Mary is actually nearsighted, and she can't see him very well. That's something that I can identify with, being blind without my contacts. Well, Joe acts toward Mary in terms of this inference. He acts a little standoffish. He maybe keeps his distance. Maybe he doesn't talk to her. Maybe she waves at him and he ignores it. Well, Mary then makes an inference about Joe. And she said, well, this guy's a real snob, and I'm not going to be friendly to him. So the next time he tries to talk to her, she snubs him. And so she reacts toward Joe in terms of her inference. And then, therefore, Joe is going to say, well, she really is a snob and she really doesn't like me, and so I was right. When in actuality, he might not have been right at all. It could have been her nearsightedness that caused her not to see his first advance, or maybe she'd misunderstood him. In fact, it's really interesting. A fellow faculty member at St. Thomas just told me about a story that her husband didn't ask her out for another whole year after the first encounter because she said she couldn't go. And the reason why she couldn't go was she had a horrible test the next day and she didn't want to fail it. And he took it to mean that she wasn't interested and didn't try again for another whole year. And so this is I just heard this the other day. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. The thing about self-fulfilling prophecies is we don't know when we're in them, and we don't know when we're caught. And that's true of everything that we're going to be talking about. We don't know when we get in these nasty situations. Okay, another example of a problematic type of behavior are you messages. Okay, and you messages, I'm going to give you the counter, which is I messages, in just a minute, but I want to talk about what you messages are. You messages imply a judgment. I wish you wouldn't be so critical. You didn't keep your promise. You're a real slob. It's the nya, the fuss, gripe, that people do to each other. And basically, it's a judgment. And what do all judgments bring? Defensiveness. When people are griping at us, it's very natural to get defensive. Now, what's more useful are our I messages. I messages are a way to express our feelings, but not incur as much of a defensive response as the you message. And there are 3 steps to the I message. Okay, you first describe the other person's behavior. Then you describe your feelings. Then you describe the consequences that the other person's behavior has for you. Okay, let me give you an example. When you didn't pick me up on time this morning, behavior, I was late for work and got chewed out by the boss. Consequence. That's why I got so mad. Feeling. Okay, another example. When you talk about my bad grades in front of our friends, behavior, it makes me feel embarrassed. Consequence. And that's why I withdrew. Okay? Again, explaining the situation. Now let's see if we can decode some you statements and put them into I statements. Okay, what would you do with don't be so touchy? What's touchiness having to do with? Probably explosive behavior. Could we say something like, when you constantly flare up over every little thing, it makes me nervous, and that's why I flare back at you. feeling. So what you're trying to do, that wasn't very good.
It's still kind of judgmental.
Yeah, it still was kind of
Flare-ups
judgmental.
of judgment.
Flare up.
Constantly flare up.
Okay. What can you do with it, Ginger?
I have a problem dealing with you when it seems like you're angry, no matter what I say. Perhaps you need to calm down before we talk. Perhaps we should wait a few minutes.
Perhaps you need to calm down.
Yeah, that's true. Perhaps I do. Perhaps I'm the one with the problem.
Okay, good. Very good. Yes.
Simply, I get nervous when you're angry.
I don't know what to do.
Okay, that's good. Very good. Okay, let's try another one. You didn't understand a word I said. What can we do with that one? Yes.
I don't think you it would be something like, I don't think you understood what I was trying to communicate. And therefore it would be something, and then you said, so I still feel like I need to explain it because I'm frustrated that I don't think you understand me. That I'm frustrated that you're mad at me and I don't think, there's a reason for it. That would be a way of saying why you want to continue to explain. And so it's now expressing in terms of I want, or you're feeling a need to communicate as opposed to you stupid person, you didn't understand me.
Okay, good. Yes.
Or you could say, maybe, I had it a second ago. Maybe you didn't understand me. Should I explain it a different way?
Good. Very good. Yes.
Sometimes you can say, too, what is it that you heard me say, so that I can say it differently, so that what I'm trying to say, you're getting.
Okay, very good. Okay, excellent. Excellent response. It's such a sharp group. Now, besides self-fulfilling prophecies and you messages, there's another very problematic type of problem, and this is what we call a spiral. And spirals occur when relationships intensify. A's definition is intensified by B's reaction. A's definition is intensified by B's reaction. So again, you're getting caught in sort of a whirlwind or a pattern. And there can be both positive and negative spirals.
I was thinking some spirals are lovely.
Yes,
They're a lot of
positive
fun.
spirals are wonderful. Like a teacher can be very positive to the student. That's a great paper you wrote. And then the student says, oh, gee, likes my work. So I'm going to try really hard to get an A in that class, so works even harder on the next paper. And so there's better student performance. And there's even more positive response by the teacher. This is an example of a positive spiral. The boss improves the working conditions, and the workers say, oh, gee, this was great. So worker motivation and productivity goes up, and the boss does even more for the workers, gets them a new lounge and a new water cooler. And so and then the workers work even harder for the boss. So again, another positive spiral. The consequences of these is that positive effects keep building. And so these can be good. The downside is the negative one, where anger feeds anger, distrust feeds distrust, and the relationship worsens.
She has an affair because he had an affair, so he has another one.
Yeah, and they get caught in an awful, unsatisfying relationship. Now, William Wilmot calls these gruesome twosomes. And we laugh, but they're very sad relationships because it's this spiral of negative types of responses that people give toward each other. Now, still another problem is the paradox. I love paradoxes. These occur when communication is self-contradictory. And one of my very, very,
I got the wrong one here.
oh,
Here,
there
we
it
want
is.
this one.
Okay. One of my very favorite ones is don't read this sign. Because you can't possibly do what I tell you to. Because you are reading the sign, and, I mean, you can't do the same things at the same time. Yes?
One thing my father used to always say when I was younger and he'd do something and I would model it, he'd say, Melanie, don't do what I do, do as I say. And I'd be like...
The ultimate paradox. And what happens is that the statement asserts something, and then it, on another level, it asserts something about the assertion, and the two are mutually exclusive. They don't go together. Yes?
Well, classic parental thing is as you're screaming at your child, stop screaming! You know.
Stop screaming! That's back to Melanie. Don't do as I do.
Yeah, that's another great one. Another favorite one that I've seen in the back of books is, this page is intentionally left blank. I love it. Because, of course, it isn't blank.
It's got a message on it.
It's got a message on it.
And isn't there research that shows that these double binds pushed to the extreme cause schizophrenia?
Yes, they do. And we're going to get into that in just a second.
Okay.
And that's our next one.
Oh, okay, we're headed there.
There's a special relational paradox called a double bind. And Gregory Bateson did most of the pioneering research on double binds. And there's a specific pattern that happens in the double bind. There are two persons, and one of those persons is the victim, the person who is constantly put in the double binding situation. The second thing that has to be there is this is a repeated experience. This isn't just happens. Now, we all do this to each other from time to time. Those aren't the ones that we're really concerned about, although they can be problematic as well. It's where people do, where one person is the victim over and over and over again. And again, what happens is what happens in the paradox. There's a primary assertion, and then there is a secondary assertion that contradicts the first. It's the old, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. There's nothing you can do and be right. There's nothing you can do and avoid punishment. And as Martha says, when the victim sees no escape, especially a child, this can cause really serious problems. And at least Bateson and his colleagues feel that this is at least one reason for childhood schizophrenia. The world is totally contradictory. The child can't decide what to do, and so chooses not to do anything and go into a trance. Now, there are some less extreme examples. Another one of my favorite ones is, you should be less obedient. How do you do that? Because
You have to obey me in order to be less obedient.
yes. Another great one is, you ought to love me more. Well, if you are loving the person, you can't not love them. You know, that's a problem too. There.
There's also some men that are real domineering and they want a woman to be obedient in one way, but then they get frustrated because she is like a puppy dog following him around and it irritates him, but yet that's what he wants from her in some ways.
Yeah, and that's a real double bind because the wife can't ever please that person.
The line is so thin that you can't stay on it.
And I've already given this one before. This is one of my favorite. Be spontaneous. I love that one. How can you possibly be spontaneous? Another example, and this is from Knott's. If you don't love me and stay with me, I will die. Therefore, I must cling to you no matter what the price. The more I cling, the more you feel smothered and distanced. The more you distance yourself, the more I cling. So they're caught in this ghastly problem of constantly double binding, and they are usually caught in an awful situation. So we want to avoid double binds at all costs and be aware of these paradoxes, and not to put our loved ones into situations that no matter what they do, it's going to be wrong. I think it's probably one of the most dangerous things that we've talked about tonight. Yes, Ginger?
I think as a parent, one of the hardest double binds that my husband and I have dealt with as parents is when your kids are being bullied at school. The pacifist in me says, don't hit. But the aggressor in my husband says, defend yourself. Both are right. Both are wrong. And your kids are real messed up because they have to, there is no good answer. And your kids really, I know we struggle with it as parents, and the kids struggle with it at the same time because they can't hit back at school. It's not fair. And yet there's a line. But that's something we deal with our whole lives.
And then if we turn around and spank them, it gets even more contradictory.
Yeah, well, one
Even though I endorse a good spanking now and then, just for the record.
one of the examples what Slavic, Bevan, and Jackson use in double binding situations is the parent who says to the child, cuddling them after they've fallen off their bike, "Oh, it doesn't hurt." Where the cuddling, says, yes, it does hurt, but the words say, no, it doesn't. Or the parent that says to the child, now we want you to be independent, but be in by 11 o'clock.
And be sure to call me every time you change locations.
Or another one, the child who has stayed home with mother or dad way beyond the time that they should be out of the house, and mama says, oh, I want you to be on your own, and then the child moves out and mama has a heart attack, so the child must move back in order to take care of mama. So more paradoxical situations.
Or mom calls 3 times a day after they move out, or every 4 hours to make sure they're okay.
So these are some really difficult, yes?
I was thinking one of my friends saw something happen, and the parent didn't want to explain it, and so they said, no, that really didn't happen. The tension that creates in a child is really tough. It was a situation where a cow and a bull were mating, and the parent didn't want to explain it, and so she said, no, you didn't see that.
And they know they did.
Well, that's, classic double bind situation. So what is the child supposed to think? Am I seeing things?
I must be crazy. I'm hallucinating.
Am I hallucinating? I must be crazy. So
because my mother speaks truth, and I trust her. Until
A better answer might have been, oh, they were playing.
It's a new game.
Don't play that. Don't play
that. An injunction.
Oh, dear.
Only cows do that.
Yes, only cows.
Only cows can play that game.
Okay, now there's some other destructive kind of patterns that we need to talk about, and these are much more specific. The first set of these are the helpful critical patterns. And one of my favorites is the mind reading. This is predicting what the other is feeling or thinking without really asking. What you need is a drink. You're not hurt, you're just embarrassed. It's trying to think as the other person thinks, but ignoring all kinds of cues that person really isn't there. So
It's contrasted to empathy.
Yes.
Empathy, you'd be getting the cues right.
Yes, whereas mind reading, you're merely projecting what you think the other person is feeling, but you're not right, and you won't take no for an answer. Okay, another problematic problem is the hypercritical person. This is the assumption of helpfulness, but help is actually withheld. Okay, and really poignant example of this is, and I kick myself to hope I haven't done this to someone, a student studies very, very hard, but does very poorly on a test. And so that student requests help from the instructor. Then the instructor indicates willingness to help. But then when the student tries to make an appointment, the instructor is always busy or not at his or her office hours. Or when the student does come, the instructor cuts off the discussion really quickly and says, well, you'll just have to study harder. And so this makes the student very frustrated. And then the instructor is indignant. Well, I tried to help. So there's this assumption of helpfulness, but you're really not helping at all. Yes?
My daughter had an example of that a couple of weeks ago on a test, and she made an appointment with her teacher the next morning, very early. And she got there, and the teacher was there. And the teacher sat at the desk and said, okay, now work it out. And she didn't know how. And she was deliberately saying, you have to work it out. You have to figure it out. She wasn't helping her. So it just drove her crazy. We had to get a tutor. But that's another way of holding back.
And that's a great example of this, because this hypercritical quality doesn't help the student. Yes?
Well, the minute you said hypercritical, it made me think of, I used to collect books of Peanuts cartoons, and there's one it was obviously end of the year or something, and Lucy's coming up with vast lists for every other character of all of the things they need to fix about themselves. I mean, these things are like, down to the floor and out the door lists, and in fact sometimes she comes back the next day with, I forgot a few, but here's some more for you. She's not going to help you work on those or anything, but she's going to tell you that you have vast numbers of flaws that all need to be worked on.
Good example. Great example. Another serious problem is the active-passive continuum. Have you met those people who are so intense or so desperate that you're exhausted to be around them? Have you met people like that? They're just so intense. And this causes us problems in relationships when people are too intense. Now, certainly we have our moments of being intense. We have our moments of desperation. But we can't be on edge all the time. It makes for, we have to be stable at least part of the time.
I know a couple of people who live in crisis. They live from one crisis to the next, and it's just tiresome.
It is tiresome.
If you encounter them that you're going to have to deal with the current crisis.
With another crisis.
Which by my definition might be an urgency, but it doesn't always even measure up to a crisis.
Okay. Well, yes.
I know someone who lives like that too, and after a while I start interpreting as, you're using this to try and get attention or something, and I'm going to start discounting these crises and stop listening, because it's like, I'm sorry, no human being has one every day.
Yeah, and you suspect maybe the person is neurotic. Yes?
I gave one example like this when I was talking to my daughter about a person she was talking about, and I likened it to going up to a really beautiful carousel. And you get on the carousel, and the next thing you know, in about 5 minutes, you're going 100 miles an hour. And you're holding onto the pole, and you're going to fall off. And the minute you get off of it, you're hurting. But you're watching that thing spin around, and you're so happy you're away from it.
Great example. Great example. So we can't be on the edge all the time. And people who live on the edge all the time are exhausting. They're too intense or too desperate. Passive is the other end of the continuum. This is the person who avoids interaction. A little conversation that might occur. Why don't we ever talk anymore? Oh, I didn't know we weren't talking. You know what I mean? You know, details about your work and your day. You know, I want to hear about the people that you work with. I want to know about what you did. Well, dear, what would you like to talk about? I don't know. Did anything interesting happen today? No. Why don't you go buy yourself a new dress for the party Saturday night? Oh, okay. Now, this is a real serious problem here because the one person has tried to, engage the other in conversation and gets the stiff arm and is rewarded instead with a new dress, with material goods and possessions. And this gives the one person the idea, well, how can I possibly criticize this person who's so nice to me? So it's you almost feel like you've been slimed,
Well, your emotional need is still not met. A material need, it might not have even been a need, but Melanie?
Is that the passive?
That was the passive one.
The person that said go buy yourself a new dress is being passive.
Yes, because he's putting her away in a passive way.
The relationship's being destroyed because the emotional need to communicate is not being met.
Yeah, they're not interacting. And so one is trying to interact and the other is not. Another series of problems are the aggressive, evasive ones. And the aggressive ones have 5 different stages. And Knapp calls these the 5 stages of hassling. And we can hassle each other in a whole variety of different ways. We can be very witty. This is repartee. Noel Coward made his fortune writing plays like this. This is when people are wittily sarcastic to other people. These are the polite or impolite put-downs, but at a very mild level. For example, like maybe a father says to a son, "Too bad you can't stay longer, son. I've got some real interesting people for you to meet. Your family."
Ooh,
and the son says, "Oh, really? Do you know them?" Just that kind of that nasty little digging back and forth. Now the next stage, and this is a little bit more intense, is cliched, canned or programmed comments, where people aren't really listening to each other, but they're responding with programmed comments. For example, "Is that right? You got it. Oh, yeah? Yeah. Is that so? Yeah." Well, what do they say? Absolutely nothing. But this, this back and forth hassling each other. The next stage is what we call name calling. These are those humiliating or destructive labels that we put on others. These are, of course, all the ethnic insults that people have suffered with. There are also other things like calling somebody a pig or a bum or a hawk or a nerd or a jerk. All those awful names that kids call each other and adults call each other too. And this, of course, is a stage up in our aggressive hassling. The next stage is even worse. We go beyond name calling to actual insults or threats or accusations. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Can't you do anything right? So there are those nasty things that go a step further. Or, "If you don't get down here to dinner right now, I'm gonna," well, I won't say it, but something really...
Feed your dinner to the dog.
Yeah, feed your dinner to the dog. Or, "I'm gonna, put you out in the garage without your dinner, or something like that. It's a real threat to their personal safety. Or I'm going to beat you with a cane. But it's very, very nasty. One time in the grocery store, I actually heard a mother say to her son, and I can't even remember the boy's name, Joe, you get your over here. It was just
inappropriate. For a public place.
And the poor kid just was so embarrassed, and it was very unpleasant for everyone around. And then lastly, our last stage of aggressive behavior is, of course, the physiological outburst. This is the physical fight, where people actually engage in hitting each other, or one person hits another. And we, of course, call this abuse. Or a temper tantrum. A temper tantrum is also physiological degeneration because you're losing control. And temper tantrums are very unpleasant in 2-year-olds, but they are disgusting in adults. And unfortunately, lots of adults have temper tantrums. They yell at other drivers on the freeway, they yell at their secretaries, or the secretaries yell at the bosses.
They throw and break things.
They throw and break things.
They take their car keys and mar up someone else's vehicle.
Yeah, these are the physiological outbursts that are so unpleasant. Now, we think about these as being very unpleasant, but the evasive ones are even a little bit more damaging, because at least you know what you're dealing with when you see aggression, because it's out there on the table. The evasive patterns are even more complicated. One of my favorite evasive patterns is change the focus of responsibility. If you're in trouble, then put it on something else.
Dog ate my homework.
Yes. The reason why I was late to work was because the traffic was bad. It wasn't because I allowed only barely enough time to get there. The traffic was bad.
And knowing it was raining.
Or you can also play the if-then game. I could be the best if only something were, whatever. I could be the best friend ever if only my job weren't so demanding. Okay, let's think of another one as a group. What's another if-then one? I could be what? Yes.
I could be a really generous person if I won the lottery.
That's a good one.
Great. Okay, that's
Melody's
great.
got one over
Yeah,
here.
I just got my Publishers Clearinghouse. Boy, could I do a lot of good things with that money. Yes.
Something I hear all the time from people that I work with, we all kind of complain together about having to work and go to school. And they say, God, we all say, I could make straight A's if I didn't have to work so much. Kind of makes yourself feel better about not making straight A's.
I could publish a book if I didn't have to teach all the time. Right. If I didn't have to earn my paycheck.
Yep.
We agree on that one.
Okay, so what happens there is, instead of owning your behavior, which we all do as what we have to do as responsible adults, we shift the focus of responsibility onto something or someone else. It's that person's fault, never my fault.
Karen?
It's even worse, and it's a thing. I know I see it a lot in teenagers, and I've been hounding mine and trying to get them to own up to more stuff as opposed to always diverting it. But I know as a parent it's easy to slip into. It's the thing of I'm punishing you now, and I wouldn't have to be this mean to you if you would just follow the rules.
Yes, that's a good one. Yes.
There's a book that reminds me of this. It's called Nasty People, How to Deal with Them Without Becoming One. And
I have to read that book. Sounds great.
The focus goes beyond the dealing with others to just invalidating. I mean, you shift responsibility by totally invalidating the other person.
Very good. And of course, that would be an ultimate disconfirmation. When people ignore your ability to be. So that's excellent example. Okay, something else.
Oh, I have to give credit to Ginger's daughter for one. She has this most annoying person on her school bus.
Oh, yes.
And she calls him a pineapple. And he'll do annoying things to her, and Nicolette will say, "You're a pineapple, ha ha." But it just confirms and invalidates all this harassment.
It's real rude. This is not little stuff.
Okay, another evasive pattern is changing the direction of the conversation. And again, this can be very disconfirming. How do you like my new dress? Do you want to go to the Rockets game tonight? One of my favorite cartoons is Hagar the Horrible. And there was this great cartoon a while back, and it was Hagar and Lucky Eddie talking. And Lucky Eddie says to Hagar, "You're a great leader, Hagar." And he said, "You're a great leader too, Lucky Eddie." And then he says, "And you're such a true blue friend." "Well, you're a true blue friend, Lucky Eddie, too." And Lucky Eddie says, "And you're so smart." Nice hat, Eddie. Great cartoon. But I mean, classic, changing the direction of the conversation. And usually people do that to avoid saying something unpleasant.
Or lying.
Or lying. So, but unfortunately, when it's done all the time in relationships, it can be damaging. Yes.
I have a girlfriend who, she married this guy, and who was a real good friend of my husband's as well. And when we knew them, when we first got married and stuff, I thought, oh, he's just this really friendly guy. And then later she went through some more stuff, and later realized she had some problems and worked on some stuff. But she was talking about the fact that he's actually, and it wasn't until she explained it to me that I realized that he's really a person who he has this very friendly facade, but like if you try and ask him a personal question, if you're not real sharp and if you're not watching for it, amazingly enough, that question will be deflected, and suddenly you're finding yourself answering questions about yourself instead. You don't get the information; it's just deflected off to something else.
Very interesting. Yeah, great example. Great example. Another problem is changing the level of the conversation. And this is always weird. Going from concrete to abstract. Like a student maybe wants to know why a professor can't help more, and the professor launches into an abstract philosophy of education and tenure and promotion and problems, and goes completely to the abstract level and doesn't deal with the situation at hand. Yes?
Example.
Good.
I'm not going to say any names, of course, and it wasn't Dr. Hahn, but I had a professor during my stay here at University of Houston, and I asked him, I was going to be out of town for some reason during an exam, and it was an important trip I had to make, and I said, I think it was for my work, and I said, I have to be out of town, can I do it early? And I figured if I was willing to do it early, it would make it seem okay or whatever, or late. And he said, I used to make exams early, but now I didn't get the promotion that I wanted, and I'm not going to put aside that extra time to help anyone else out. Either you take it on the day you're supposed to be here, or you make a 0. And I had encountered him in other semesters where he was very helpful, so that's why I approached him. And then he didn't get, I guess, what he wanted, so no more help. Everyone else suffered because he didn't get, So that's kind of a example.
Great example of what we're talking about, changing the level of conversation. Something else that's really weird that happens kind of in the same way is when you talk about two totally different things in the same tone. Like if you're talking about death and breakfast, in the same tone. You know, like, I had orange juice, and I had a waffle, and I had some bacon, and some bran cereal. Or, well, I read the obituaries today, and Mary and John and Joe all died. You know, that same tone. And that's very odd. You know, when people talk about, you know, very serious things in the same tone that they talk about something insignificant. You know, because it again changes the level of the conversation.
Did you have a comment?
Yes.
Well, you could be asking somebody how they feel about something, and they don't want to tell you, so they slip into an intellectual discussion of what you're really trying to say to them. And I've had to say to them, I didn't ask you, you know, what the theory and so was. I asked you what you thought, you know, that kind of.
Excellent example. Excellent example. The last evasive pattern that I have is inconsistent messages. And these are always bizarre. They're usually when the verbal and the nonverbal don't match. The verbal, I love you, and the eyes are cold, the pupils are constricted, the body is tense with a backward lean. You know, I mean, there's certain things that you do nonverbally if you love someone. You lean forward toward them, you look in their eyes, the pupils are dilated. You know, those are things, the voice is warm, you know. If those things aren't there, then you begin to think, well, does the person love me or not? And what are you going to believe? The nonverbals. Every time you're going to believe the nonverbals. The problem with inconsistent messages, especially, is with children. They don't know what to believe, and they aren't as sophisticated about realizing this is an inconsistent message. The verbal doesn't match the nonverbal, and I'm going to believe the nonverbal. They're just confused.
And they'll take the verbal, up until age 7 or 8?
Yes.
If you say go play in the street, they'll play in the street.
Yeah, they miss that subtle sarcasm. Yes.
One you see in the courthouse all the time is when they go, not guilty.
Jacqueline's bobbing her head, not guilty. Shake your
Do it all the time.
Oh, that's great. Oh, wonderful example. But these are things that we have to be careful of, and especially with children. We have to be sure that our messages are consistent, that when we say to the child that we love them, that we do all those things, that we hug them and we show that we love them. Don't tell a child ever, you know, to go out and do something that you don't want them to do, thinking that they'll know you're being sarcastic. Because for sure, they'll do it and get in trouble.
What would you say about age 11 or 12? They start to get that
Well, let me see.
sorted out?
I'm trying to remember my Piaget. Flexible thinking doesn't start till about age 9.
That's the reversibility
Yeah,
stuff. When you
8 or
pour the
9.
liquid in the containers, and they can tell that wide and flat is equal
So-
to tall and narrow.
They'll begin to get sarcasm, which requires flexible thinking, about age 8 or 9. But before that, they won't at all.
Nancy?
It's funny, I get cold very easily, and if I cross my arms, I'm warmer. And I have a conflict with that because it appears that I'm not engaged in what's going
It's like
on.
a closed position.
It does, but quite frequently it's just because I'm cold. So, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent
Do you want
example.
a parting comment here? Or did
Well,
we get through everything?
We've talked about many different topics tonight. These are all problems that we can face in relationships, but if we're sensitive to what can happen and what we can do unknowingly to other people in relationships, we can be much better communicators and have much happier families.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Williamson. We appreciate your being here with us this evening and participating in this discussion. We'll see all of you next week. No, you'll be on vacation next week. Yes, 2 weeks from tonight we'll continue. Thank you.